Okay, so in the first part of this kind of lecture, I talked really about how the Anglo-Saxons came to be in England and um, their significance and all that kind of thing. So I'm not going to rehash it. You watched it. So now I want to talk a little bit about the Anglo-Saxons, their culture, and their poetry, and um, the things that we're going to be seeing in The Wanderer, The Wife's Lament, and The Dream of the Root. So, some marks of the. Oh no. There we go. So some marks of the Anglo-Saxon culture, they were very much a warrior-based society. And if you think about in our time period, when remember in the first video I said that we're a land without boundaries, we're a land that gets power, and we survive based on our ability to be ruthless warriors, right? So of course, this kind of value of warfare and the emphasis on the warrior is incredibly important for um, it finds its way in almost all of the literature of the Anglo-Saxons. So we have this kind of warrior-based society because warfare was so common, and there is that need to protect family and clans from the outside enemy. And it's a sign of your respect, your social status, your power was gained through your ability to fight, and also through your loyalty to your lord or your king. And this kind of loyalty to a lord or the leader of kind of this clan or a king is the relationship is called comitatus, but um, we see the significance of this loyalty and in the Anglo-Saxon poems, but it kind of evolves from being loyal to a lord to being loyal to a king, and the warrior becomes the knight. So we see that evolution happen throughout the period, but it has its roots here in the Anglo-Saxons. And I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, this idea of loyalty to a lord, loyalty to a king, is something that is used in order to aid in conversion from pagan ideals to Christian ones. So there's that loyalty to an actual earthly lord that transcends into the loyalty to our heavenly King. So keep that in mind. So religion wise, we are in the Anglo-Saxons did not believe in God. They were a pagan group of peoples, and they offered really no hope of an afterlife. They were a fatalistic society, and the only thing that really mattered was your earthly fame, your name, your reputation, um, because that's the only thing that brings eternal life, because people are going to talk about you long after you are dead. And they lived on through the poetry or through the writings of these bards and these scoffs. So reputation is everything to these people, and they're very, like I said, they're very fatalistic. They valued the concept of the heroic code, which honored bravery and loyalty, generosity, and friendship. And each of these elements are going to find its way into the codes of chivalry as we move from the code of the warrior to the codes of knighthood. The Anglo-Saxon people were fierce warriors. A lot of them were expert seafarers, especially those of the people living on the coasts and on islands and things like that. They were fishermen, farmers, craftsmen, and they all had this kind of strong sense of community, but ultimately they were a very male-dominated society. Um, the only role of a woman in this society was to be a mother and a wife, and in some cases, she was used as a means to kind of bring peace in between nations through marriage, which or not nations, but clans or different groups, which we'll see in the Wife's Lament. Other values, they were they didn't write. They were very much focused on the oral tradition of oral storytelling, where they sang songs of gods, of heroes, and creating poetry. I mean, the bards were up there in terms of you get the warrior here, but you've also got the bard because they're the ones that tell the stories. They're the ones that convey information and keep your culture alive. So they kind of are responsible for providing an element of the afterlife and really give rise to the English language before people start writing manuscripts. So that's a perfect segue, talking about the bard, into discussing Anglo-Saxon poetry. And Anglo-Saxon poetry can be broken up into two categories. They are either epics or elegies, and unfortunately we do not have the time to read an epic, but you guys are familiar with epics because I'm sure at some point you have read the Iliad and the Odyssey, where you follow the hero's journey. But I'm also fairly certain that a number of you have read Beowulf at some point in your English career, or at least have seen the horrible version of the movie. But epics, the most common work studied from this period, is an example of an epic, which is Beowulf, and elegies. And we're going to talk specifically about elegies in just a second. Some common themes of Anglo-Saxon poetry, in addition to that kind of pagan Christian tension, but this idea of weird, and it sounds weird, right? And it's kind of hard to articulate the meaning of this word because it's kind of untranslatable because it's um, a word that retains its own meaning in Anglo-Saxon etymology, but in ways that we can understand it in modern English. Weird is the concept of fate or personal destiny, and it's often used in juxtaposition with Christian concepts of God's will. But it's a little bit more complicated in that because there are different ways of looking at weird. One, it's like you're predestined to have whatever fate it is that you have. If you're doomed, you're doomed. There's no way around it. But if you're not, fortunes could change. And I want to read to you guys because I think that this says it better than I can explain it. What is Anglo-Saxon scholar Stephen Pollington describes weird as. He says that they, Anglo-Saxons, believed that at any given time, some men were doomed to die, and certainly that's a reaction to the uncertainties of warfare and accidents and things that they experience in their daily lives. So, tied to that is the concept of weird, as in the course of events. And the underlying structure of time. So weird is fluid. Weird, it fluctuates at any given course of it's a fickle thing, fate. The Beowulf poet describes weird in a way that weird often saves the doomed hero as long as his courage is good. So here we have tied to this idea of fate and destiny our courage, our fortitude, our bravery. So, if the implication is that if a man's courage holds, he has hope of his fortune or his destiny changing, since weird the way things happen will often work to help a man. So, um, in a nutshell, um, weird is this kind of complicated idea that is tied to destiny, fate, um, and later with the Christian influences of translating these Anglo-Saxon poems, it becomes associated with God's will. So, other common themes of Anglo-Saxon poetry, they're very depressing, because we live in such a bleak, fatalistic, the Anglo-Saxons were a bleak and fatalistic people. Why wouldn't they have depressing poetry? Some of the common themes are the courage of a hero, the emulation of Anglo-Saxon ideals, the brevity, the quickness of and sadness of life, the mystery and cruelty of the sea, which we don't necessarily see in, well, we do kind of in some regards in the Wanderer. But there is also an Anglo-Saxon poem that we're not going to read called The Seafarer, where that is certainly prevalent. This idea of exile, ruin, and lament. So again, and I also want to mention, I didn't put it here, but this idea of fortune and the reversal of fortune. So the language that we're looking at for these Anglo-Saxon poems is a kind of a Germanic language because the Saxons come from Germany, but it's a mixture of various German dialects and Old English. And Old English in and of itself, Anglo-Saxon, is a foreign language. Just an aside, I took a class in college on Anglo-Saxon and learned how to translate the things. And oh my word, is it difficult and hard. So it is a foreign language. So if you look at this little picture that I have up here, the only word that I really recognize is oft or often, and this is the first opening lines of the Wanderer, or the poem that you guys are reading. So I don't know about you, but I cannot read this. Can you? So this is what Old English looks like. So I wanted to show you this so you can kind of have an appreciation of the language that we speak, where it derives from, and where it comes from, and really have an appreciation of how that evolves into what our modern day English looks like. So here's another example of Old Anglo-Saxon English. Um, and okay, that's ugly, but okay. There are two types of Anglo-Saxon verse. There's heroic poetry, like I said, like with Beowulf, and then there's elegiac poetry, which encapsulates the um, the sorrowful laments, and the ones that mourn the deaths of loved ones, and not necessarily people. They can also, elegies can mourn the loss of the past. So the elegy, it reflects the dominant mood of Anglo-Saxon poetry, and reflects a sense of sadness over the grimness and the transient nature of earthly life. And usually they end up telling stories of the glory days, how things used to be so great and wonderful before things changed. Because oftentimes in Anglo-Saxon culture, because of the warfare and everything, things did change very drastically and very quickly. Two of the elegies that we are going to be reading this week are The Wanderer and The Wife's Lament, and they were written between the 597 and 999 AD. We don't know. We don't know who the authors are. We don't know who's responsible for them, but they are found in what is very interesting. It's called the Exeter Book, and the Exeter Book is a 10th century collection of Anglo-Saxon poems that were compiled by monks during the rise of Christianity and during the Anglo-Saxon period. So you've got these monks translating um, these Anglo-Saxon poems, and that kind of brings me to this idea of tensions in paganism and Christianity, because the monks aren't going to faithfully translate things that are pagan. They're going to use them to serve their own purposes, so to speak. So, if they can. So we don't really know the true nature of. I mean, I guess we do now that we have. Anyways, going off on a tangent that I don't need to go off on. Here's a picture of the Exeter Book and some common themes of the works found in the Exeter Book. Exile, the reversal of fortune, it's a wheel, fatalism, life is brief and full of peril, the inescapability of fate, and Christianity. They were quick to embrace this idea of Christianity because it does bring them comfort and relief from this bleak kind of pagan outlook. So I'm going to stop here. This is kind of a background of Anglo-Saxon poetry, and I'm going to pick up with some explanations on the Wanderer and the Wife's Lament, and then finally the Dream of the Rood. So stay tuned.